Hi, today we're going to talk about guitar trills. More of the mechanics than the theory behind them, but at the very beginning let's talk just a little bit about what trills are. Trills are the successive and rapid repetition, alternation of two different notes that are the interval of a second. We can have a minor second, major second, or an augmented second. More on that a little bit later. But trills always involve what's called a principal tone and the ornamental tone. Or in other words, if we were going to play a trill over an E minor chord, the notes that make the E minor chord are E, G, and B. So any one of those three notes would qualify as a candidate principal tone. For instance, if we wanted to play an E minor chord and play a trill with the E as a principal tone, E belongs to the chord, it's domestic to the chord, we would also alternate that with the second above it, whatever is in the key typically. E to F sharp is a second, so that would be a good candidate for a trill, for instance. We could also use the G as a principal tone, since it belongs in the chord, and trill with the second above it, A, because G to A would be a second. And the last candidate here, really dealing with triads, would be the B, the fifth of the chord. We could trill with the C because it's a second above B. If we were in a key, say D major, where the E chord is the 2 chord or the supertonic chord, we would need to trill that probably with the C sharp, since that's domestic to the key of D. So typically the notes will belong into the key that they're in. It's not always true, but that's a common rule of thumb. A good example here would be that trills often happen on a dominant chord right before a final tonic chord in a cadence. So if the D chord was heading to a G, like a 5 to a 1 chord, dominant to a tonic chord, at the end of a piece, end of a phrase, we might see something like this. What I played here was I played the trill note, the ornament note first. This is called an appoggiatura trill. Ended on the principal tone, which is usually always the case. The F sharp belongs to the D chord, and then closed out with the G chord. I also played the anticipation, I forgot. I could repeat that G just prior to the G chord. That would be a common thing to do. The principal tone sometimes is struck first, and sometimes the appoggiatura tone, the non-principal tone, the non-chord tone can be struck first. And it really depends on a matter of era, Baroque versus post-Baroque musics, geographical location. There's a huge myriad of reasons why and when one would play things in a certain way. And there's an amazing book on that by Frederick Newman called Ornamentation in Baroque and Post-Baroque Music. I would strongly encourage you to seek that if you're interested in some more history involving that. I also wrote a book called Conventions, An Introduction to the Conventions of Contemporary Music Notation, which is available on Amazon, where I spend a chapter talking about ornamentation and cover this decently enough. Not as extensively as Mr. Newman, but enough for any musician to work with, as well as tremolo notes, which I'm going to talk about in a moment too. So we'll consider that our very brief music theory introduction to what trills are. And what they always are, like I mentioned a moment ago, is that we really deal with the intervals of seconds. I'm going to take this B, for instance, in the 7th fret first string and trill that with I make a minor second trill with the C above it. A minor second is a half step and 2 letter notes. A major second would be like B to the C sharp above it. 2 letter notes, but 1 whole step apart. And I'm going to call this a C double sharp, because that way we retain the interval of a second. It's an augmented second, because it's a step and a half above B. If we were to call that a D, the enharmonic reinterpreted version of that note, we wouldn't have a trill, because that's the interval of a third. A third, a fourth, like B to E, or even for that matter, any larger interval, B to F sharp would be a perfect fifth. These can't be trills. Of course, one can play them technically speaking, but they're not called trills because they're not seconds, they're not ornaments in that regard. What these are called is tremolo notes. That's an entirely different topic. And again, in my book, I cover that in a chapter all to itself. And tremolo notes are very common to play on many instruments, but on the guitar, one can do that too. Tremolo notes can feature in multiple different ways. Single note repetitions, single note tremolo, measured or unmeasured, and two note tremolos can occur too, on any instrument, just like the guitar. So just so we understand the terminology, trills are always seconds. Anything larger is considered a tremolo note. In this video, I want to cover 6 different mechanics regarding trills. We're going to cover a minor second trill with the first 2 fingers, fingers 1 and 2, a major second with fingers 1 and 3, and an augmented second with fingers 1 and 4. We'll cover a minor second with fingers 2 and 3, major second with 2 and 4, and finally the last combination, a minor second with fingers 3 and 4. To play trills, we really need to be able to play all of these pretty effectively, and on any given string group, regardless of the combination. Whenever we're playing these trills, we always want to have a strong anchor with whatever the finger is lowest, well actually the first finger in each case. So my first finger is anchored pretty solidly, and the other one is playing not up and down motion, but rather in a semi or a more circular motion. I hammer on hard and then pull off towards the ground rather than straight up into the air. If we just come straight up into the air, the effect is rather weak. The note is rather weak. So it's always more of a circular motion that we're doing when we do this. And in each case, the index finger is down pretty strong. Even when we're playing trills like this, with the second finger and third, or second finger and fourth, the index finger is really the one that's down the most solidly. Although my second finger's down and anchored pretty strong too. Third finger's anchored pretty strong here, and supported by the other 2 fingers just before it. I don't really like this. This is rather weak, unless it has to be done. It's not really preferable. One other trick to remember too, to keep excess noise down, especially when you're playing with distortion, it should also be the case with an acoustic instrument or even playing clean. For instance, let's say we did a series of trills in one key, maybe D major. Just all advancing diatonically. If I do this, I'm going to always, after I strike the note, I'm going to make sure that my second finger is in contact with the string above it, first string in this case, since I'm playing on the second string. And then right after I strike the note, my pick and or finger is going to come into contact with the third string. So both of the adjacent strings next to the one that we're playing on, if it's an interior string, is going to be deadened. On top of that, I've got my thumb resting on the lower bass string so that no other string is going to be sounding, so no sympathetic vibration will happen that I don't want to happen when I'm doing this. So everything else is deadened when I play this. So as long as my hammer-ons and pull-offs, my legato technique is pretty clean, I can play these indefinitely without any loss of signal. And no other notes chiming in to interrupt my line. So this is a technique to add while you're playing these trills. Make sure that you practice trills in every combination of each finger and every different locations on the fingerboard and on every string, of course. I'm going to play a series of similar diatonic trills across each of the 6 strings. So the first one will start in G, the next one will be in C, followed by F, B flat, D, and the key of G. They'll be the same physical patterns in each case. I'm just going to play diatonic or domestic to each of the keys. 6th string. Fifth. Fourth, F. D again. And finally G. It's popular in music to have dependent melodic lines, such as parallel thirds or parallel sixths. It's pretty uncommon, but occasionally we run into trills involving these. Minor thirds and major, 2 major thirds, sixths, major sixth. It's less common to trill 2 minor thirds. Physically, that's kind of challenging. It can certainly be done. Here's a technique that I worked on years ago that I learned from Niccolo Paganini's Caprices, actually, the Opus 1. He did a lot of octave trills, wrote them out for violin, of course. And I've never seen anyone really do this with the guitar, but I like it. I think it's kind of fun technique thing to practice. So you'd play an octave and then trill a minor second above both the octave pitches. For example. The hard part usually is getting both fingers to coordinate simultaneously. That's the trick. Teaching these to students, I used to see a lot of alternation between not coordinating the 2 fingers together. So the challenge really is developing that coordination. Useful? Maybe. I know I use it a lot in my playing, but I don't see it a lot. But I think it's a fun thing to practice for technique purposes. Hopefully you'll enjoy it too. Give it a try. This last example I arranged for guitar many years ago from a piece that I really like. It's by Johann Sebastian Bach, and it is the Gavotte number 1 from the English Suite number 3 in G minor. The BWV on that's 808, And what happens in this piece is something that's very simple to play on a keyboard, which he of course wrote this for, but on this instrument it's considerably more difficult. What we've got is in this excerpt, the upper voice is doing a trill, A and a B flat, and the lower voice is playing a separate line. And they need to happen simultaneously, so that promotes quite a bit of a challenge on this instrument. Easy on the keyboard, far more difficult on the guitar. Then the lines continue, and what happens is the trill happens in the lower of the two voices, A flat and a G, while the upper line takes its own melodic line. So playing them both together, we get something like this.